getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and our problems are getting bigger as well. So we need to build something to help ourselves. The health systems or many other private organizations, with the help of the federal government, started to build something amazing.
I feel like you would expect a lot of even private industries to take a little bit longer to get something that's significant up and running.
Mayo Clinic really entered into this realm of innovations and venture capital or investing.
Cleveland Clinic had a great academic excellence, but did not have a dedicated commercialization service.
Mayo Clinic Ventures created and managed the patient licensing and early commercialization products. Their goal was to build the newer technologies and license them out to the others. If I can actually commission Elon Musk or Tesla to be able to do it, then I would put my money on humanoids. I would put money on where we can get the physical labor done by the physical AI. Welcome to episode 2 of Edge Podcast. I'm Ashok Gupta. I build healthcare AI inside real health systems. I spend my days dealing with epic clinicians, workflows, and what actually breaks in production.
And I'm Gunwardeep Singh. I've spent my career in healthcare tech, working at the intersection of healthcare, technology, and entrepreneurship. My focus is on how digital products actually change the patient experience and how these lofty concepts that we see in the headlines translate over to real-life use cases.
Today, we are going to look at what happens when the largest healthcare operators in the country decide to act like a venture firm. So, Gunwardeep, do you want to give us an introduction for today's session?
Let's do it. So, what we found, and I'll set the stage here, is that hospital systems aren't just acting as buyers or consumers of very different vendors anymore. They're becoming builders because of 3 major trends that we're seeing in the industry. One is a major capital shift, where money is moving more towards provider operations, where hospitals feel the pain daily, and how to best make those operations more efficient. Second is digital health funding as a whole has moved in from a concept development to more of a deployment and prove this ROI concept. And finally, AI adoption has moved from experimentation, more so in the abstract realm, to full deployment across the board, identifying use cases where hospital systems can best benefit from these efficiencies. So what we're seeing a lot of today is that hospital systems are acting as VCs, as incubator firms, rather than consumers of these different vendor products. And that's where we're going to do a deep dive on 2 major health systems. So there's a lot of health systems in the US today that are acting as these incubators or are funding their own internal development and innovation projects. A lot of them are creating new separate arms that are solely dedicated to innovation. What we wanted to focus in on today are 2 of the biggest names in the hospital realm, in both the US and in the larger picture as well. So health incubator number 1 is going to be the Mayo Clinic, where Ashok is going to give us a deep dive on where this innovation arm came to be, where this incubator came to be. And second is going to be the Cleveland Clinic and how they came to create their strategic arm as well. So Ashok, you want to kick us off?
Definitely. And what a coincidence. Out of all hospitals, we picked the 2 health systems with the name clinic in them.
Yeah.
All right. So while doing the research for Mayo Clinic for this episode, I came through a lot of interesting facts. So let me start by taking us all the way back to 1985. That's when this entire Mayo Clinic incubation system came out. And then someone would say that was the day when Mayo Clinic really entered into this realm of innovations and venture capital or investing. But the true fact is, earlier in 1980s, there was an act, and I want to say it right, Dole Act was passed. And you would say, what is that? Actually, that is what changed the entire innovation in the healthcare industry, or I want to say government-funded innovation altogether beyond healthcare as well. So what this act actually did was said, before this act, if you would actually have any funding from federal government, the innovation was technically owned by the federal government. So with this passing of the act, a private institution even funded or partially or semi-funded or took a grant from the federal government can build something and own the IP of the entire innovation. This was the shift when the health systems or many other private organizations, with the help of the federal government, started to build something amazing. And that's what led the Mayo Clinic to start their incubation arm.
So do you think this was more of like an ROI and general IP protection type of thing of they had these innovative concepts beforehand, but because they weren't necessarily protected by this act, that was the hesitation before entering into this space?
I would say the easiest analogy would be employee versus employer. Someone who would want to work for somebody else and they're comfortable with it. The innovations did happen before that as well. Versus the people with the mindset of being an employer and an owner, they want to build something for themselves. And a lot of innovation started when you could own the innovation itself.
That makes sense.
So moving on to our 1985 and 86, that's when we started to see Mayo Medical Venture, later renamed as a Mayo Clinic Ventures, created and managed the patient licensing and early commercialization products. So their goal wasn't in about investing. Their goal was like to build the newer technologies and license them out to the others. And then they were helping the innovation, they were helping the development, and it was a way of also bringing more money towards the healthcare system as well. The key leader, one of the key name I am really fascinated with is Mark Bretes. Mr. Mark started this entire foundation of Mayo Clinic, worked for Mayo Clinic for 37 years and recently retired in 2016. A lot of contribution or the effort that he actually did is in the part of this podcast, you would hear all these efforts that Mayo Clinic has made and the impact on the healthcare industry. I would want to contribute a lot of a credit to the Mr. and then be able to actually be connected directly to something that he laid foundations to. One of the major early success of this Mayo Clinic venture was MRI motion artifact correction. The MRIs today, we know the core foundation of that comes from the patent that was actually developed in this particular venture by Joel Felmley and Richard Emmon. Yep, there's in the very couple first years itself, I think it was published in 1989. And that's when the venture published the patent and then later licensed it. And today we still use it as a foundation of all our MRIs.
It's a pretty quick turnaround too, right? This was something that they started prioritizing in 1985. Let's say it takes about a year to get that program up and running. To turn around something like that within 3 years is pretty impressive. I feel like, you would expect a lot of even private industries to take a little bit longer to get something that significant up and running there, right?
And not to forget, this is 1980s.
Yeah.
We didn't have the AI back then. So from licensing and commercialization, the Mayo's mindset shifts over to institutionalization and venture thinking. Now, this is where the actual venture and incubator arms actually starts coming in. You'll also see in this decade of 1990s, towards the end, Mayo Clinic really doubled down on the strategy of venture investing, dot-com bubble, if you all remember. This is exactly the same domain we're talking. Mainly in 1992, the early 90s, that's when Mayo actually wanted to expand their healthcare system, go beyond their flagship campuses and creating a scaled, big presence. And then that's when the commercialization strategy shift really started to show up. Okay. Moved up from licensing to startup formations, equity participations, investing. Right in the peak of the dot-com, 1998, TBV, Technology-Based Venture Fund 1 was created. Mayo's first formal venture fund, led by Steve Van Noorden, and marked Mayo's transition to the equity ownership. Wow. And then came the tech bubble, right? But that did not stop Mayo from continuously innovating and working on the different companies. 2000s was really a successful decade when you see Spark Lab. In the early 2001 and 2002, this was laid down. The idea was, okay, instead of purely working on technology, all these workflow gaps in the operational gaps, can we do something to fill those gaps in and build the products that will actually help us do better operations? And that's what the Spark Lab started to work on, focus on, and redesigning the workflows and accountings.
And was this the thesis of that fund that was put together in the early 2000s to try to, fill these workflow gaps? Was there specific technology that they were targeting?
It's not much actually out there, what exactly was, but it's my personal thinking is the investing fund was about enabling other companies to build something that will help the healthcare system. Sure. This was probably came out of the Spark Lab, probably came out of the necessity of we need something to fix this broken operating system. Okay. We're getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and our problems are getting bigger as well. So we need to build something to help ourselves.
That makes
But
sense.
point is right. The venture fund did help others to build something that a healthcare system can help. And one of the great example of that is Preventis. Preventis was remote cardiac monitoring spun out of the health system, early digital health success, one of the success stories from the Mayo Clinic back in 2007. 2007 to 2009, magnetic resonance elastography (MRE), developed by Richard Eman, clinically adopted and later commercialized globally. And 2008 came to the second round of funding, MMV Fund 2. Mayo Clinic again puts in $10 million in 2008, start and doubling down on their strategy of helping innovation and funding startups. And later in 2008 or late part of 2000s, they also rebranded their Spark Lab to Center for Innovations, they'll be called as CFI as well. This led to a transformation in 2010s from enterprise data readiness. So now funding, innovation, and now we are actually getting into the data. Now, what I would want to say was a critical milestone or time in the shift of the strategy where healthcare systems recognize the power of the data is going to lead the healthcare in future. And today, 2020, we can definitely say they were right. Healthcare systems are the biggest data generator.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's still a massive point, right? Like you see a lot of these smaller startups and, mid-sized startups as well. I think in our last episode, we mentioned that one acquisition that OpenAI had done for a small company that their whole purpose was both data orchestration and data labeling, right? So the fact that these health systems are generating so much patient data and there was a market for this way back in, not way back, but 15, 20 years ago of data labeling. And that's still a relevant space today. I think that goes to show that there's a lot of work that was done there, but there's still a decent amount of opportunity within this space as well, right?
Definitely. And I wouldn't call you on like when you say way back for 10 years ago. In the age of AI and technology, 10 years is a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so just taking it further, around 10 years ago, Ambient Clinical Analytic, ICU predictive and analytical company came out of these CFI. VARE platform, if you're, is branded as AWARE, very successful. In 2016, 2018, and Friends came out. AI company co-created with the Mayo, public partnership announced in 2018, but it was all within the innovation and incubation arm of the Mayo itself. The 19 and 20 Mayo Clinic platform came out, secured a government and governed the environment, enabling the external innovations with the Mayo's data and clinicians. And this is like one. Now they're talking about like, we need to do something about data. And then 2019 and 2020 is like right before COVID, they start actually like saying, okay, you know what? Now we know how to actually organize and manage this large data sum, but we don't know what exactly we can do out of this. Let's do something where we open this up for others to come in and then actually leverage it and build products around it. Let's have a co-ownership and then build something. I think you're already knowing like where I'm going with this part now.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think this is one of those examples of it really comes from a top-down type of leadership vision, right? A lot of companies, whether they're private or they're these, public hospitals that have some kind of innovation arm, there needs to be some kind of strategic vision that's laid out from a CIO or a CEO level and set as this is our mission for the next 5 years, 10 years, however long, right? And I think from separate research too, this is where a power shift happened in just the leadership roles at Mayo Clinic. I don't know if you're going to touch on that. So if you are, I'll hold off on it. But this is where a new president was appointed, right?
Correct. That's right. Like we're getting in the last 5 years, and this is like a lot has happened here. Now, before I touch on that, like you just mentioned like amount of time and the vision. I always say is like we always underestimate what we can do in 10 years, and we always overestimate what we can do in a 1 year. So looking at a story that actually unfolded over 50-year period of time, we can definitely appreciate how much vision it would have taken back in the 80s or 70s to be able to actually visualize what's going to happen in 2000s.
Absolutely.
Yep. So taking for the last 5 years, post-COVID era, this is like where the biggest shift came in. Every single thing changed, and healthcare was untouched. Well, not untouched, sorry, wasn't. So let's come to the COVID era,
Yeah.
and healthcare changed for good, and
Yep.
a lot of digital health and platform adoptions actually happened during this area. Platforms operationalization was a key term during this time, like a formal onboarding, governance, and external pipelines. Healthcare systems were enabling other products come in and help their problems, because the time it was of essence. We need to grow very, very fast. Technology is growing pretty fast. They appreciated the platform and then offered them everything within their control, like data or workflows or access to the patients, so that the new technologies can be tried and tested on the existing patients. During this time, 2022, they actually also launched a platform called as Accelerate, a 30-week co-development program for AI and digital health startups that during this short period of time provided them platform, they provided them access to the data. They also provided them like a test grounds to be able to actually take these early technologies and then work with the patients. And in this, one of the few of the recognizable names are Echo Health for AI cardiology, and then you have LV Core, mobile ECG, and in 23, 24, last couple of years, I would want to say trust and responsible AI. This is where the health system has started to position themselves. The Mayo itself as a validator and a single setter and an ecosystem referee. This is like the today's stand of Mayo is. I'm curious, like just from last 50 years of story, what
Yep.
do you think, like how Mayo would react any different in next 10 years?
I think they've just started that shift towards this concept of interoperability, right? And that just started meeting in the last 6 to 7 years, right? And I think they're owed that in large part due to that leadership change of, I'm looking at the notes here. It's Dr. John Halamka, who was elected as the president of Mayo Clinic. And his whole background was in digital health, interoperability, and data governance, right? If his vision when he initially joined on was, I want to see interoperability be first in mind. And that was just at the start of his tenure. And that's where this platform Accelerate got started. There's that 30 week program versus the 2 year program. I think this is just the beginning of Mayo Clinic basically opening up its doors for eligible platforms to sign on and do these programs so that we can drive innovation further, right? I don't think it'll change in any way that they'll close down access in any way. I think this is really an opportunity for them to even take the step of better organizing that data for third-party vendors so that there's an initial like workload already taken off of their plates. So I think it'll slowly get to a point where these external vendors are going to access their data a lot quicker and a lot easier.
Right. And I'm glad actually you brought up like their second program, which is a 2 year
Yes.
incubator. So any of the health tech or entrepreneurs out there, if they are thinking about like how they're going to bring their product to life, this is one of the very good ways to participate in one of the incubator programs for one of the health systems. Not only you're validating your idea in the best place possible, you will be provided access to the data, you will be provided access to the subject matter experts, and then you will have go to market. Like I would, if I would want to say, maybe like 5 to 10 times faster than if you would develop everything on your own and try to sell these health systems as your product.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, so your thoughts on this one? You've started obviously a couple of different ventures in your time. With that said, there are these two options that are presenting themselves, the 30-week program versus a 2 year program. If you were starting up a company today, what would be your first choice? What would be the factors that you're, pulling into your head to decide, I want to go this route versus this route? And when would you say is the right time for a company to apply for one of these programs or get started in one of these programs?
Right. I'm glad that you brought it up. Generally, as an entrepreneur, and the word comes around, like if I'm an early startup, at the moment Mayo will say, yes, we accept you. I wouldn't think again. I will just like go and say yes.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even think about like 30 weeks versus 2 years, but it is a very critical point. If it was any other industry, I would say 30 weeks is more than enough of a time. Either you build the product, test the product, and then go to market within this period of time, and or pivot, go to something else, use your time for the good. But healthcare is not like that. There are so many red tapes. There is so many regulatory things you have to work with. 6 months is literally nothing in that perspective. So the answer is it depends. So where this product or company is, if you are at the napkin idea set level, if you are at that stage, I would never ever participate in a healthcare program like Mayo. With 30 weeks of time in the incubation, you will never be able to find the problem, design a product around it, and then test the first round. Your time will just go by, and then you'll have a dent on your resume by saying you were part of the Mayo's incubator and you couldn't do anything even with that.
That's fair. Yeah.
This 2-year program is perfect for this type of scenario. You're very early. You don't even know exactly your idea A, B, C, and you want to validate what you want to build and then test. 2 years is a very good time to be able to build something and test it out. If you're already mature product, you always want all what you want to do is test your go-to-market strategy. This 30-week program, it will be amazing. This is where you'll get the test ground, and then you'll be able to validate with one of the best names in the industry.
That makes complete sense. So the 30-week program is more so for companies that have already seen that there is enough of a product market fit. It's more so a matter of fine tuning. These are the features that we want to bring forward. This is the way to best improve our functionality so that when we actually do bring this to the larger public, then we know that it'll be successful, right? Whereas on the other hand, if you're a slightly immature company, you don't necessarily have the talent yet, but you're just at the early stages of pulling in the folks that you need. That 2-year program, if you're lucky enough to get into one of those, or you're smart enough to get into one of those, that's really the right market for it, right? Or that's the right profile for it, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
That makes sense.
Right. I'm curious, what is it the Mayo is the only one contributing and leading the success pack, or are there more? And I do want to say this as a disclaimer, just in respect of time, we had to pick health systems. Not that like other health systems aren't contributing. They have done amazing work. I know personally a few of the innovations and startups and companies that spun out of the other health systems. I wish we had a lot more time and we can build a podcast for 4 hour long. We would touch base on most of them. But
yeah, if this was a 10-episode series, it would be different, right?
It would be amazing. I think we should be able to build like one entire season all around the hospital incubation.
Absolutely.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So with that, I'm very curious, what does your research says about Cleveland Clinic and their innovations?
Let's do it. So I'll give the precursor. I'm a little bit biased. There's a reason why I chose Cleveland Clinic. I went to undergrad over at Case Western, and we were, a stone's throw away from the Cleveland Clinic. My 4 years and a little bit after that of undergrad research was all in the Cleveland Clinic Learner Research Institute. So that's why I saw their name pop up as a big incubator, and I said, I need to take this one.
Yeah. Awesome. That's good. So that means what you're saying is like you can firsthand tell about like what your views are, not only like what you see on the internet and what's available out there, but your personal experience with Cleveland too. So I'm all ears. I want to hear all about it.
Yeah. So what I was really surprised on, and I'll hop into a little bit of the history as well, is Cleveland Clinic is more so in the format of translating some of their clinical research into a commercialized product. And so there were a lot of PIs that I would work with. I think one name keeps on popping out. His name is Stan Hazen. So he was the director of their cardiovascular metabolic sciences department. And I saw his name pop up a few different times, that a lot of his clinical research that he was running in the lab pretty much right next to ours, he was then translating over to, this is a product that we can bring forward. And that was all in I think it was more so in pacemaker work and also cancer detection from blood tests. So those are two big things. But before we get into the specific products and where they fit in that way, I can give a little bit of history on the Cleveland Clinics. Cleveland Clinic in the late 1990s. So I know your story started in 1985. Cleveland Clinic, from where I could see it traced back to 1990s, was the start of the clinic innovations. So at this point, they were already well established alongside the Mayo Clinic as the number 1 or number 2 heart institute, as well as number 1, number 2 across the entire board for hospitals in the US and also hospitals globally. In the slightly larger context, slightly meaning just that region, the Cleveland Clinic was succeeding in a somewhat declining economy. So the city of Cleveland as a whole and the larger metropolitan area around it was at odds with this declining industry of mainly manufacturing and a lot of blue collar hard labor jobs. How does this relate over to the innovation arm? Was a stark need for some kind of boom in the Cleveland area that was coming all the way up from the government level. So the governor of Ohio and the mayor of Cleveland at that point had realized that Cleveland is lacking behind. We're seeing a decline in population. We're seeing a lack in knowledge-based areas like information technology, biotech, and business and professional services. So more of those manufacturing jobs are getting sourced out to Mexico, to China, to Canada, and other places. What is our next move so we don't fall behind as one of these Rust Belt cities and make sure that we stay ahead of the curve, right? So that's when the Northeast Ohio leaders came together and noted that they needed a entrepreneurial incentive. So they started allocating additional funding towards hospital systems and IT services as a whole to drive some of that innovation here. Cleveland Clinic was one of the first recipients of that funding. I didn't see a specific act that they had dedicated to it or a specific fund that they had dedicated to it. But one of the first moves that the Cleveland Clinic did was pull in talent. So they knew that they had a lot of good talent that was in-house at the Cleveland Clinic doing research, identifying workflow opportunities to develop technology, but they didn't necessarily have someone to orchestrate the entire system. That's where Chris Coburn enters the picture. So this man, I think we've started to admire more and more the work that he's done over at the Cleveland Clinic. And I know now he's over at Mass General Brigham over in Boston, but still left a strong legacy over at the Cleveland Clinic to be carried forward. So when they hired Chris Coburn on, his previous roles were all in pharmaceutical research or in biotech research at the government level, where he was part of the funding that was going forward to some private industries to drive their innovation. So he brought the same kind of mindset to the Cleveland Clinic. His idea here was we have a lot of ideas, we have a lot of IP, but we don't necessarily have that translational model to take it from intellectual property to licensing to company creation. So the Cleveland Clinic had a great academic excellence, but did not have a dedicated commercialization service to further scale a lot of the work that they were doing. And I think around this time, so still in the late 90s, he was profiled as a commercialization operator. So his biotech research firm, Battelle, had labeled him that way.
Great
He had
title
left
to be, huh?
Yeah, it's a great title. And when he had left Battelle and gone to the Cleveland Clinic, that's how he was known, right? So he took the Cleveland Clinic from no people in this Cleveland Clinic innovation arm to bring it up to 60 people under his belt, right? And they were all working as a machine, as a process-driven machine to act as an enterprise function. So over the course of 13 years, they went from a process of, there's this workflow gap that we're seeing from the cardiovascular research side of things. Here's a technology or here's a research method that we're putting into place to fill that gap and better translate the care to the patients. And let's put together the legal and structural framework to move that from research over to this is now a company spinoff, but still under the Cleveland Clinic umbrella. So over 13 years from the late 1990s all the way to the early 2000s, and I think all the way to late 2000s as well, he spun off 57 companies and raised a total of $700 million in equity funding. So his whole role was, again, take a look at this from a 30,000 foot level, understand that these are the different mechanics that we have in play, and how do we first take those innovations that we have internally and move that outwards to company spinoff. So a couple of notable companies that came out of it were CardioMEMS, which, as we mentioned before, this was an implantable wireless cardiac sensor that then later translated to, a more refined version of a pacemaker. There was arterial remodeling technology. So not only dedicated to devices, they also had the opportunity to do some of this software development, which for the early 2000s is still a significant step. They were able to do visualization software to aid in any surgical procedures as well. Another company that came out of it was Juventus Therapeutics, which was a pharma development company. So it kind of covers the spread there, right? You had your implantable devices as your hardware component of your innovation. You had the software components coming from your arterial remodeling. And then thirdly, tertiarily, you had your Juventus Therapeutics, which was entirely more bench science based. This is a pharmaceutical drug or pharmaceutical pathway that we want to investigate. We can both do it in a computer modeling software as well as doing bench research and get that to a point that we have a drug to market. There were a few others. One was biolabs, and this was more so in that pharmaceutical side. But it was a significant success story in that they went public in 2000, and I think were later acquired and then dissolved somewhat in that acquisition process. But this just goes to show that they were kind of covering the spread, and Chris Coburn was doing a great job of identifying here, there's a lot of different opportunities that we aren't necessarily capitalizing on. And this is a great way for the Cleveland Clinic to both make a wave in this innovation space and maybe somewhat compete with the Mayo Clinic at the same time, but also have a good footing of the commercial space as well.
Now, this exactly reminds me of like the value of these incubation and investing. In the early days of Google, even at that core tech company, Larry Page had like a 70-20-10 rule, and that we need to spend 70% of the time on like what we are doing right now, 20% of like what we need to do near term, and then 10% of the time we need to invest on something totally unrelated to what we do.
Yeah.
That's where the Gmail came out of, and then they fostered the culture of like working on something that may not even impact your day to day, but that would actually like change the course of the company. So I love it. Like when somebody in the power and authority sees the opportunity and then takes it to the level where can it be a commercialization of that. And then it not only adds a value to the society at large, but also brings a lot of value for this private institution trying to do a better good.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Couldn't agree more, right? This is coming from the vision of someone that was hired for a specific purpose of focusing in on that 10% of your time. And he was given essentially a playground to say, these are all the opportunities that you have presented before you. Mm-hmm. Make something of this, right? Make something that has an impact, that, has a lasting legacy from this, right?
Totally makes sense. On the flip side of it is like not as a big and large successful healthcare firm. A lot of time, like this exactly goes opposite. When you're small, focus on something very specific. So if we're a startup or anyone startup founder, we have to always be very cautious of not wasting our resources on something that doesn't matter today.
Yeah.
So there is a right mix out there or balance when you start working on unrelated stuff, and then that may become your most successful product.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was, there's a little bit of a difference here between, this is a startup with one specific function or where we should focus our energy one way. I think fortunately, Cleveland Clinic was already in pretty stable footing. Unlike a lot of other health systems, right? It's always going to be continued issue of health systems are competing with pretty tough margins across the board. But Cleveland Clinic and the Mayo Clinic are exceptions to that, right? That's why they have the resources to somewhat dedicate towards these innovation arms. So I had talked of one of the Cleveland Clinic Innovation is what it's called, but they also have a few other centers. They have the Cardiovascular Innovation Center, and then they also have a actual like physical incubator setting. It's 50,000 square foot facility where the researchers that they're pulling into it are solely dedicated towards developing their own technologies, mainly hardware side of things. But they have the ability to kind of, spread their arms in multiple different ways. So we talked a lot about that Chris Coburn era. And I did mention that he had later moved on to Mass General Brigham. And you would think, with that leadership kind of vacuum that happened, there's a concern as to what do we do with this organization now that such a key player is no longer here, right? So 2013 was when he left, and 2013 is when they had the question of, what do we do now? And their focus now shifted towards, rather than, spreading our efforts across a smattering of different companies, of those 57 companies, and I'm sure there were far more of those that didn't necessarily make it all the way. Now it was a matter of focusing on specific companies and saying, rather than do this, broadly, let's focus in on a few companies here and there and see how we can make this process and do it at scale, right? So after 2013, they saw the existing processes that Chris Coburn had put into place, and said, let's formalize this a little bit better and make it such that we can sustain this long term. The key signals that the Cleveland Clinic was looking for at that point was emerging companies that were not necessarily early stage anymore, or no early stage ventures anymore. It was more so at the point of, you've already proven that this is a successful technology or successful device. What resources does the Cleveland Clinic need to provide you, whether it's data for any digital health products or actual physical space for any of those devices? And how do we get those to a point where, you have the resources to progress from there? So a couple of notable companies that came out from there. Starting in 2016, Cleveland Clinic had this headline of moving towards the digital health space and the tech innovation space, right? We see a lot of that shift happening, like at the Mayo Clinic as well, of 2016 to 2020. Now that's digital health space, and kind of taking on from there. So Diania Health was one of them, which was specifically tailored for AI-assisted clinical trial acceleration. What they did was they developed a software that would carry all of your regulatory and compliance needs from your clinical trials, pull that down as a checklist set of items, and then now you, as someone who's writing up a clinical trial proposal, have all the tools that you need to push that forward, right? Another one was Method AI, which again is more so on the software side of things, where they had a 3D ultrasound software for AI guidance on robotic surgeries. So again, translating the needs from the operating room or the surgical space, identifying, hey, there's a gap here where we can make our processes a little bit more efficient and our clinical outcomes a little bit better. And how do we develop a software around that to serve that purpose? So that's where the shift kind of happened. These are companies that, already had a good footing in the Cleveland Clinic and were internal kind of projects run by some of their clinicians and also some tech teams within the Cleveland Clinic. And how do we bridge the gap between them so that we can move this technology forward?
I'm curious, were these companies 100% generated within the Cleveland Clinic itself, or was it like somebody else from outside brought in the idea and then resources, and then Cleveland was able to facilitate their success?
Yeah, from my understanding, it may be the case that this isn't super widely reported on. But a lot of these or all of these were entirely developed in-house. So I had mentioned that one PI that worked next door to us. His name was Stan Hazen. He started up a company called Xena Therapeutics, which was a drug development and gut microbiome research company. A lot of their initiatives, or the entirety of their initiatives, were done in-house first and then matured to the point that they can now make a formal company out of it, but still with Cleveland Clinic as a major equity shareholder of.
Nice. Yeah. That's where I can see that Cleveland had a little bit different approach.
Absolutely.
Of finding the talent in-house and then be able to actually build the product, take it to the maturity level, and then commercialize it.
Absolutely.
On the flip side, majority of the healthcare systems, when they started to incubate, they offered the healthcare system as a place to test and try and access to resources, rather than actually a physician within one of the department wanted to start a company and then they started out the company. Oh, so amazing. That's cool.
Yeah, I love it. So yeah, I think this brings us to a good point of, we're recognizing a little bit of the differences. One is, let's open the doors up to external companies. You can come in and use our data to better develop your products. And the second is, let's grow this in-house to a point where we can, now commercialize this, right? So let's talk a little bit about, what are the synthesis, what's the key takeaway of these lessons learned from these two really good examples, right? The first piece that I saw as a pretty common theme was that, hospital systems are acting similar to tech innovators. So you see a lot of these private industry tech innovators and incubators that are taking in a lot of these smaller companies, acting as venture arms or VC firms to develop them and push them out into the world, right? The common theme that you see within those VC arms themselves or VC firms is that these are emergent technologies that are meant to disrupt the industry. Right. And their whole idea is, here is one problem that we see in the healthcare industry. Let's turn it on its head and let's make something new. Right. I think a lot of these health systems have the opposite view of that. Right. Because they deal with these clinical workflows on a day-to-day basis. Let's say, for example, that surgical guidance software. Right. This is more so a way to get from point A to point B just a little bit more efficiently, rather than fully uproot the entire process, right? And I think that's a key kind of vision shift between, the tech space and the hospitals, right?
Absolutely. This, I can actually even talk from my personal experience while building Thera now. And then when the AI wave came and we were like, okay, we got to do something about AI too. Otherwise we'll be left behind. That's most founders actually started talking about AI. And then very soon you realize it's like, no, actually that's not how we do want to do something with AI, but it's not just for sake of doing it. And I'll give you a great example of like when we started building AI and AI based features, and a lot of companies built around this novel idea of like one problem and then now they're going to do it brand new style. The real application of AI in today's healthcare is like when you take a big, large workflow and then you take a smaller part of gaps in the workflow or an operational or a product for the side, and then use the AI to fill that in. That's the one of the best way I've seen a success happening. One of the smallest example I'll give you, like we just did a product release and a feature release this last week, and where the home exercise program search, we innovated our search with the AI. Instead of like this large data set of home exercise programs and you're querying by the similar name and you're trying like to find the specific exercise by the name, and there's a similarity match happening. Now the AI is able to understand your big paragraph of description of exercise if you would want to say so. For example, like exercise where you get down on almost like a chair-like position, but like don't go all the way down. Now it is able to interpret that you're talking about partial squat and then not actually showing the results with the squat, which is similar but not the same, and be able to do it. Product release, day 100% adoption by the end of the day. That's the type of a small problems you resolve with the AI in the part of the workflow or the product feature. And then you can see the adoptions. When you build the entire company, we know that how many times like the entire product is able to successfully change the industry.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that came from both you and also some therapists recognizing that, hey, like I'm trying to search for certain exercises, but I can't necessarily nail down the one that I want to include in my home exercise program that I'm creating as this separate path, right? And I think that's a really good kind of like leave off point to kind of put a bow on some of the stuff that we talked about here, is that there's a lot of unused potential, right? And I think there's these health systems that are starting to develop these venture arms, or health systems that already have a pretty deep foundation in these venture arms, are starting to recognize that there's a lot of smart people within their organizations, right? A lot of innovative mindsets, a lot of, entrepreneurs, but that are working for their company. And they recognize that there's a lot of unused potential based off of the workflow gaps that they're seeing, right? And with that, there is now starting to be a shift towards, let's invest in those folks that are showing this potential. Let's invest in those technologies that they're developing or those processes that they're developing and make this something of its own, right? And I think that's kind of the key point that we want to drive home, is that, organizations today that are successful in their own right, there's always opportunity for improvement. There's always opportunity to look inward and invest in it, right?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So with that, these were amazing insights. Like, well, I wish that we had more time to deep dive into other health systems and then see what they have built. But before we call it a day, I want to do a very quick exercise so that a couple of years from today, when we look back at this episode and we can say, we told you so.
We called it.
We called it, right? Okay, so here is like, if you were a health system or the CEO of a big, large health system, and you had to pick one company to build from your problem set, and you have to pick the people from your own health system, and then build a company, what problem would you address? And then if you have a good amount of a fund and you want to invest into another company, what type of somebody else building product you would be more than happy to invest in?
Ooh, wow, that's a good question. This is kind of the market outlook of, where the money is going to flow in the next few years, right?
That's right.
The first thought is always, AI documentation, AI scribe software, but I don't want to necessarily place my bets on that entirely.
Don't you think
I
that
think
ship
might
has
go against
sailed?
the grain, right?
Don't
That ship has sailed. Investments have been made. That is done. I think there's still a lot of opportunity on the revenue cycle side of things. So there's a few revenue cycle management softwares that are coming to be that help navigate pretty complex payer requirements. And I think we're just scratching the surface as to how deep a lot of these requirements go and the hoops that you have to jump through to ensure you have a low denial rate. So I want to say that I would place my bets on a lot of like revenue cycle management, RCM products, as they start to pick up a little bit more traction in this space. If someone else is developing a technology, that's going to be a tougher one of where do I want to place my bets on. If it was today, I might even still say the AI scribe type softwares, you know?
Okay, you're still hung up on that one.
Yeah.
All right. If I have to give my picks, you're right. The revenue cycle is one of the areas. If I was a health system, I wanted to solve, and I would put my manpower and my most experts. Actually, one thing I would do everything possible to make prior authorizations obsolete.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Build a product that will make everything already available and be where like the health systems payers are going to say, we know that we're going to say yes to you. So why don't you become the self-manager? And that level of, and making the prior authorizations obsolete, not making it efficient, but actually literally making it obsolete.
Absolutely.
It's in today's world, it might sound a little bit far-fetched, but it can be done.
We might have just thought of a new company spin-off right there.
Exactly. And if there is something, if I don't want to do myself, which I know that as a health system, I can't really build this. And if I can actually like commission Elon Musk or Tesla to be able to do it, then I would put my money on humanoids. I would put money on where we can get the physical labor done by the physical AI. So I can foresee in 10 years from today, hospitals, there will be not only doctors and patients and nurses moving around in the halls, but there will be real robots and humanoids actually walking around as well. So I would put my money there too.
All right. I think I might have to disagree with you on that one, but I think I'm comfortable with that, you know?
With the AI scribes for now. Right?
Yeah.
This was fun talk. I really appreciate your time. And this is an amazing conversation. I'm looking forward to where the next one to come. And
thank you so much. On to episode 3.
Episode 3. Bye-bye.